I'm Alan Walker. I'm a professor of anthropology and biology here at Penn State, and I teach human evolution to anthropologists and comparative anatomy to pre-med students. I've only been here at Penn State for about 10 years, but I've been around the world in my job before that. I was born in the middle of England, and I was fortunate enough that the middle of England is very geologically diverse. So on my bike, within a 50-mile radius, I could get to the Precambrian with fossils in it, to the late Ice Age with mammoths, and everything in between. Only a few geological epochs missing. So as a school kid, every weekend I was on my bike collecting fossils, so I really wanted to be a paleontologist. So when I went to Cambridge University to do geology and paleontology, and after that I wanted to do a PhD, and I wanted to do a PhD on fossil fish, because I thought they were beautiful. When you cracked open a rock and there was a fish inside, 50, 60 million years old, it was wonderful. So I had an interview at the British Museum with the person I wanted to supervise my PhD, and he kept me waiting outside his office, and I didn't have a key to get in. And so when he got inside, he asked me why I was late, and I come from a working class background, and I responded angrily. And so the upshot was I couldn't work with him for my PhD, so I had to work on something else, and it happened to be fossil primates, which I hardly remember knowing what they were. So I switched from working on fossil fish to working on fossil lemurs, which are animals that live in Madagascar. And that's what I did my PhD on, reconstructing the locomotion of these extinct giant lemurs. So in order to do that, I had to work at a medical school so I could learn anatomy, because primate anatomy is human anatomy, it's the same thing. So one Friday, just before I finished my PhD, my supervisor came in and said, "There's a job in Uganda, and I'll give you till Monday to say yes." So I packed up my first wife and young kid, and we went off to Uganda. And while I was in Uganda, I was able to watch living primates going out into the forest, to watch chimpanzees and lemurs and things like that, and also go looking for fossil signs. And after a while, a friend of mine, a Kenyan, asked me if I'd go to Nairobi with him to help start up the new medical school, which after independence was starting. So I said sure, so I moved to Nairobi to start up the medical school there and teach students anatomy, which is what I've always done for a living until I came to Penn State. And while in Nairobi, I met people called the Leakeys. And Mary and Louis Leakey and their son Richard Leakey were wandering around the place finding fossils. And Richard said to me, "You're sitting here and you know anatomy, and I don't, and why don't you work up these fossils I'm finding?" So that's how I started working with Richard Leakey. And we worked until Richard left fossils and went into wildlife, where he's now in conservation. After that, I worked with his wife for a while. And so I was working in Africa in a medical school with no future staying in Africa, because as a foreigner, as a British person, I couldn't become permanently employed there. And so one day, a person I'd met who happened to be the chair of anatomy at Harvard said, "Do you want a job at Harvard?" And I said, "Why not?" So I moved to the States to teach medical students at Harvard. And I stayed there for about 5 years until a friend and I moved out to Johns Hopkins to revamp the anatomy and cell biology program at Johns Hopkins, and I was there from 1978 until 1995, which is a long time. The Dean of Medicine at Johns Hopkins changed his title to the CEO of Medicine at Johns Hopkins, and that's when I knew my time had come to leave. Money is the driving force behind all medical schools in this country, and Hopkins is no exception. So I left Hopkins and came here. People wanted me here, they appreciate me here, and that's how I ended up at Penn State. So it's good for me, it might be good for the students. I don't have to cut up dead people for a living, which is a bonus for me. I don't have to live in Baltimore, which is a better bonus for me. And so I get to do my job too. I've probably spent about a third of my life under canvas in Africa, looking for fossils, and most of the time not finding them.